Well, the United States lost to Canada 2-0. Got outplayed. Our golden generation is doomed. But at least our manager says that we were probably the most dominant road team in the history of the sport. So everything's fine, right? Everything is fine. For the first time in basically forever, there was a massive World Cup qualifying window in January. Not only was Concacaf and my United States playing, but also Asia and the incredibly important South American qualifying that, as we've covered in previous videos, is absolute and utter chaos. Like 5 teams within 2 points of qualifying chaos. But now there is only one more qualifying window left, and a few teams punched their ticket. And to figure that stuff out, we are going to start with none of the regions we've mentioned so far. We're going to start with your Oceania qualifying news update. Oceania, 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 Oceania. It needed a special introduction because we've not talked about it before. The reason we haven't talked about it before is because they hadn't decided how they were going to do it in a COVID world. Now, if you don't know, Oceania is basically New Zealand and the assorted islands you've never heard of in the Pacific. The only reason they're not in Asian qualifying is because the travel distance is just absurd if they were. You do not want to have an away day if you are New Caledonia in Lebanon. There will be 8 teams. In Oceania, there's like 11 or 12 total. So one team had to qualify. That was the Cook Islands that qualified by forfeit, which you just love to see. They take up a group with the Solomon Islands, Tahiti, and Vanuatu. Then the other group is New Zealand, New Caledonia, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea. Teams to look out for: Solomon Islands and New Caledonia are basically the only 2 teams that aren't New Zealand that have a shot to get out. Tahiti did make the Confed Cup, but I don't think they're as good this time. If they make it out, that'd be super cool. But New Zealand will probably do this. You just finished top 2 in your group. All the matches are going to be played in Qatar in March, along with all the other qualifying going on in March. And then you go to a semifinal in Doha and a final in Doha. You finish top 2, you play the runner-up from the other group, and then you understand. And the winner of the whole tournament is going to go into the Intercontinental Playoff. Just because I've never talked about it before, it's going to happen in March. They've drawn it. The 8 teams are ready. And if you can find a jersey for any one of these teams outside of New Zealand, I would love to have it. That would be so cool. Just roll up rocking a Cook Islands shirt. I'd wear that to the club. But enough of talking about the future World Cup winner out of Oceania. It's time to head to Asia, where we will be starting breaking down the World Cup qualifying. 2 matches were played in Asia. They have 10 in their final group stage. They've played match days 7 and 8, and 2 more teams have clinched their berth into the World Cup, and it happened in round 7. So match day 7, we had Iran win in the biggest derby you've never watched against Iraq, 1-0 in Tehran. That clinched Iran's berth into the World Cup. South Korea also took care of that as well with a 1-0 win over a Lebanese team that still has an outside chance to make it to the World Cup. Big wins for Japan and Australia. Australia 4-0 over Vietnam, and Japan 2-0 over a struggling China. But despite 2 teams clinching their berth in the World Cup, the biggest result that we'll pull out for you here: United Arab Emirates beating Syria 2-0. A result that firmly puts the United Arab Emirates, a one-time World Cup team from the 1980s, firmly in the driver's seat to get to the Australian playoff, which, as you can discern, keeps them alive for a World Cup berth, while basically every team that you haven't heard of outside of them is basically out. And that was clinched by the round 8 here, because we had Oman, which, if they beat Australia, would keep their hopes alive going into the final 2 matches. They had a great tournament overall. Oman, they beat Japan, I believe in Japan, early in the qualifying cycle. Japan's since gone on to win like 6 matches in a row to turn that around. But they played against Australia, and they did Japan a gigantic favor. Australia took the lead early, but then in the second half, Fawaz scored to equalize for Oman. Aaron Moy scored in the 79th minute to give Australia some separation, but then, of course, Fawaz, with an 89th minute penalty, equalizes for Oman and produces a 2-2 result that simultaneously eliminates Oman from World Cup qualification, but also puts Australia a very important 3 points behind Japan with 2 matches to go. Now, that 3rd spot in the group sends you into the Asian playoff, where you will play the other team that finishes 3rd, which, as you can see right now, by 3 points is the UAE. They fell to Iran, a respectable 1-0, but they are still the team in the driver's seat unless Lebanon or Iraq has a late charge in tow. If you win that Asian playoff, you go into the Intercontinental playoff against the Oceania winners that we've talked about, the 5th place team from South America and the 4th place team from Concacaf, which is North, Central America, and the Caribbean, just in case you didn't know. With 2 matches to go, Oman, China, and Vietnam are all eliminated, but that wasn't before Vietnam got its first points of the entire qualifying campaign at the final level, which honestly is surprising. Vietnam had a pretty good showing at the last Asian Cup, which is something that I know because what else do I do but watch this stuff. Vietnam beat China 3-1, raising the perpetual question, how is China so bad? Japan beat Saudi Arabia 2-0 in a massive win for the Japanese. That's the other part that allowed them to get 3 points ahead of an Australian team they'd been chasing for most of the time, and it also prevented Saudi Arabia from clinching a return to the World Cup. A Saudi Arabian team that had not lost up until this point. Honestly, been a brilliant qualifying for them. But what fixtures are there to watch in March when we finally hit the ground running with the last part of Asian qualifying? Well, United Arab Emirates plays Iraq in what is essentially a 6-pointer. Iraq has to win that game to give itself a chance going into the final day. If Iraq wins against the United Arab Emirates, they are only 1 point behind the UAE. The other team with a shot is Lebanon, and they have a real shot because they play against Syria, which is obviously the worst team in that group, as you saw, with just 2 points. If Lebanon can get a win there, Iraq beats UAE, we have an insane final day to get the Asian playoff spot. If the UAE wins and Lebanon fails to win, the UAE could clinch it before the final match day. Of course, the other thing to watch is Japan and Australia. They play each other on match day 9, which means if Japan wins, they're good. They're going to the World Cup. If it is a draw, then Japan has to lose its last match to Vietnam, which is as likely as me being able to pronounce the names of anyone on the Vietnamese team. This means Australia basically has to win, or they're going to be in the Asian playoff, taking on one of UAE, Lebanon, or Iraq. Saudi Arabia just needs 1 point, essentially, from its last 2 matches in order to make it to the World Cup. But if they slip up against China, things could actually get weird, because if Japan and Australia draw, Japan is basically in. But if Australia is now playing a Saudi Arabia that just went and lost to China, a win for Australia could actually put Saudi Arabia in the playoff, which would be one of the most awkward collapses I would have ever seen. The final match day for UAE is also very important. They play against South Korea, which means if they don't get a result against Iraq, Iraq plays Syria. So if Iraq wins its last 2 matches, which is not inconceivable, I watched the match between Iraq and UAE in the UAE because, again, what else am I doing? Iraq was the better team. UAE scrapped out a draw, but Iraq looked better. So if Iraq wins that match, they then play Syria, who's been largely hopeless in this qualifying campaign. That's despite making the Asian playoff last time around and taking Australia to extra time. But you might have not known, Syria was a lot closer to the World Cup last time than you would have thought. Unfortunately for Lebanon, they play against Iran in the last match, which is going to be a very big uphill battle. So if you want to pick a team to surprise late, the Iraqis have an actual shot to get into the Asian playoff. Well, Lebanon and the UAE, if they can't beat Iraq in the first one, they might be in trouble. There's certainly plenty of drama to keep it interesting, one with an automatic qualifying spot and then one with a playoff spot. But let's take things to South America now. A qualifying that has absolutely captivated me. It did ruin me this time because I'd been big upping Bolivia, you might remember. A surprising team that could still qualify, though. You already know. You know what I'm going to say. Bolivia! 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 Bolivia, Bolivia. Well, Bolivia showed up in the first match, got a red card, lost 4-1 to Venezuela, the team that was firmly in last place. I mean, they stabbed me in the heart before they even knew what was going on. Chile was unable to cause the upset on their neighbors Argentina. Argentina continuing to hold serve. Uruguay picked up a monster 1-0 win against Paraguay, virtually eliminating Paraguay from World Cup contention, but bringing the Uruguayans back from the dead after a couple of disappointing windows. And Ecuador and Brazil played an absolutely nuts match in which there was a penalty given. You can't make this up. A penalty given to Ecuador and a red card for Alisson Becker in the 90th minute that was then reversed on VAR to keep this match 1-1, which prevented Ecuador, it turns out, from clinching World Cup qualification. The biggest result, though, was Peru and Colombia. A goal that very likely could send Peru to the World Cup from MLS player Edison Flores in the 85th minute to give Peru a monster 3 points against a Colombian team that has virtually entered a free fall at this point. This brings us to the last match day where Brazil put the final nail in the coffin on Paraguay 4-0. Argentina beat Colombia, which isn't a surprise, 1-0, because the Colombians haven't won, it feels like, in a year. Uruguay beat Venezuela 4-1, and Bolivia gave up the rest of its hope, losing to Chile 3-2. I give Bolivia a lot of credit for bouncing back from that Venezuela loss, playing hard, but Chile was able to go up into the altitude and grab a win. A Chile team that started so poorly in this qualification, it looked incredibly unlikely that they'd be in this position at all. The final result of note was Ecuador and Peru, leveling at 1, Edison Flores scoring another big goal in the 69th minute. And you can see how big that goal was. Every point matters here for Peru. A 4-point window has put them in 5th, which is the Intercontinental Playoff. Consecutive wins after what you can see are 3 straight losses, including a 3-0 to Bolivia. Uruguay is able to put itself into 4th position. Ecuador's 2-point window, they'd won either of those matches, they'd already be going to the World Cup, but they didn't, so they are 4 points clear of the drop, the playoff. Chile's very important win against Bolivia put them just 2 points behind Peru, and Colombia's lost 3 of its is 2 points in the last 5 matches and has slipped down to 7th, 4 points away from Peru. Bolivia, you can see, joining Paraguay and Venezuela as not going to the World Cup and having allowed 35 goals in the process. That little collection of teams from Colombia to Chile to Peru to Uruguay, those 4 teams competing for 1.5 spots essentially, unless Ecuador really slips up, well, they're going to have a spicy couple of showdowns in the last 2 matches coming up in March. Colombia plays Bolivia in a match that it absolutely has to win. If it doesn't deserve to be in contention going into the final day. While Chile plays Brazil, any points from that match would be an absolutely heroic effort. Ecuador plays Paraguay. If they win that match, they have got to be in the World Cup at that point, because Uruguay and Peru play each other in what has to be the match of that match day. If Peru or Uruguay win, they have to feel incredibly good about their chances to go to the World Cup. And if Uruguay wins, they have guaranteed that they are going to the World Cup. That is a special potential moment, because the final day sees Uruguay go up against a Chile team that will almost definitely need to win in order to try and catch up to a Peru team in the Intercontinental Playoffs spot. Ecuador better beat Paraguay because their last match is against Argentina, and so if things start to get absolutely insane, Ecuador could find itself maybe just on the outside looking in, or at least down in the playoff. But the goal difference for Ecuador is pretty good right now. They need to get beat pretty bad. Peru plays Paraguay in a match that you figure they have to win, and Colombia plays Venezuela. This is why Colombia is not out despite their terrible form. Not only do they play Bolivia, they play Venezuela. They've got the easiest 2 matches of the entire qualifying in the last 2 matches of the tournament, and so Colombia could very easily turn out 6 points, which means a cold-footed performance from Peru, a cold-footed performance from Uruguay with a couple of losses, which they've proven they're capable of, and Chile slipping up, which is very easy playing Brazil and Uruguay, actually could let Colombia back in, despite the fact Colombia hasn't looked like a competent team in a while. All this to say we still have absolutely no idea what's going to happen, but Bolivia's out, and I'm sad. But I know what you've really been waiting for. Concacaf, and the rise of a Canadian national team that absolutely nobody saw coming. Concacaf played 3 matches in this window because in the octagonal they got to play 14 matches, and we had to do it in like a year. And I'm just going to let you know, Canada won all 3 matches that it played in this window. It won all 3 matches 2-0 against Honduras, against the United States, and against El Salvador. And that made it a ridiculous 6 straight wins for Canada. A Canadian team that drew 4 of its first 5 matches, that has now won 6 straight and is as hot as any team in the world. It's pretty incredible. Canada is now 8 points clear with 3 matches to go from even the playoff. They're gonna go to the World Cup for the 2nd time ever. You just have to tip your hat to the way that they've performed. I mean, they kind of struggled with Haiti in the playoff just to get into the octagonal. The last hexagonal that was played didn't even have Canada in it. Like, they have exploded onto the scene so fast, I've been waiting for it to fall apart, and it just hasn't. But there were other matches that were incredibly important too, because Costa Rica has come back from the grave. They turned in a gigantic 7-point window, including a big 6-point win against Panama. Panama, a team that looked like it was cruising all the way to the end until Brian Ruiz, yes, that Brian Ruiz, at the age of 36, scored a huge goal for Costa Rica to beat Panama. They went on to draw against Mexico and beat a talented Jamaica team 1-0, giving Costa Rica those 7 points and putting them just 1 point behind a frustrated Panama team that only got 3 points from this window. Panama went and lost to Mexico in their last match, and they struggled to beat Jamaica. They beat them 3-2 in a match that was just absolutely crazy. Poor Jamaicans deserve more points in this window than they got, which was, they got 0. But those 3 points for Panama, who only made their first World Cup 4 years ago. They're now trying to make another one, and they're under some pressure. Now, for Mexico, of course, one of the teams that's competing for that top spot in the United States, there were 6 points in this window. For Mexico, there were actually 7 points in this window. The United States handled El Salvador and Honduras at home. The Honduras match played in temperatures that could best be described as unsafe for humans. 2 Honduran players were treated for hypothermia. Multiple US players as well were treated with frostnip, which is the precursor to frostbite. They played in 4 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 16 Celsius. Wind chill even worse than that. Please never do that again. It's stupid. But of course, the United States went to Canada and lost. It hurt. Canada was the better team. The United States needs a new coach, and that's all I'll say on the matter. Well, Mexico's talent for leaving stuff late did show up again. They were down 1-0 to a 10-man Jamaica until they scored in the 81st and 83rd minute to flip that result around. A draw, a tough draw with Costa Rica, of course, a team that's always difficult to beat. And then the 1-0 win against a Panamanian team that was desperate for a point thanks to an 80th minute Raul Jimenez penalty. A Mexican national team that is disappointed in performance has not quite disappointed in results. They are on 21 points, and so is the United States, a healthy 4 points clear of Panama with 3 matches to play, while Costa Rica has risen from the depths of this table with a 7-point window and 10 points in its last 4 matches to put itself right next to Panama and give itself a reasonable chance of at least reeling in Panama, if not an automatic spot, an intercontinental playoff spot. Jamaica and Honduras are officially out. Honduras has lost so many matches in a row I can't even count them, and El Salvador is all but mathematically eliminated, showing a real inability to score with just 6 goals in 11 matches. That being said, Costa Rica only has 8, but Costa Rica's allowed 7 goals in 11 matches. They are hard to beat. The final set of fixtures is going to be incredibly dramatic. We'll track first Canada. They play Costa Rica. Canada, of course, has won 6 straight matches. Costa Rica hard to beat, and they are playing for their lives, and so that match could delay Canada's ability to celebrate. Also, because Panama is probably going to get 3 points, they play against Honduras. The US and Mexico play each other in the biggest derby in Concacaf by 3,000 miles. The United States travels to an Azteca that will finally have fans in it. At least the last reporting that I was able to find is that Mexico's had its fans suspended for 3 home matches. The United States visiting is the 4th. What a coincidence. But the point is there's a real opportunity for Panama to gain points on one of those teams. If the USA or Mexico wins, Panama could only be a point behind. And if Costa Rica pulls off the miraculous, they could only be 2 points behind, an automatic spot with 2 matches to go. And then the pressure starts to really turn up. In round 13, Canada plays Jamaica. I can't see them getting past this game without having clinched World Cup because of other results or their results. It's a match that Canada should probably win. Costa Rica gets a shot at El Salvador. As long as Costa Rica scores, they'll probably win this game, which means they do have a chance to pick up at least 3 points, 4 points in their first 2 matches if they can draw Canada, and that gives them a real shot. Mexico plays Honduras, and the United States plays Panama. If Mexico beats the United States goes into a home match against Panama, likely only ahead by a point with 2 matches left, including that one. That's not fun. Mexico, if they lose to the United States, they've got the respite of playing an Honduran team in free fall. Granted, they have to play on the road, never super easy in Central America, but you have to back Mexico to pull out of there with a win. This brings us to the final match day, a United States trip to Costa Rica that will just not be easy. This is a very difficult window for the United States, right when the US doesn't need it, right at the end. Mexico gets to host El Salvador, so you have to think even if they lose to the United States, they're going to pick up at least 4 and probably 6 points down the stretch, making them safe, while Panama has to win that opening game against Honduras because after the US, it plays Canada. Panama gets that game at home, but Canada's the best team in CONCACAF right now, and so that is not going to be easy. Costa Rica also going up against Canada and the United States in this window means that a win against El Salvador is an absolute must to give them a chance. The point is, a lot of the teams that need to gain points on each other are playing each other, so there is a huge amount of swing ability, and essentially almost anything can happen. Costa Rica could coast into an automatic spot. The United States or the Mexican national team could plummet out. Canada could be made to feel rather unwell if everybody all of a sudden starts winning behind them because they do play against those teams. If Canada starts to feel the bite of the pressure a bit, they only pick up a point against Jamaica, well, all of a sudden Panama can actually catch them in terms of points. You never know what's going to happen. The officiating is hilarious. The fields are terrible, and the matchups, they are great. And I look forward to making a video about the United States making the World Cup because please, please, please,